happy. Okay, thank you very much for your welcome and for the committee for bringing me here along with Cheryl Gottschall in Queensland and Lorraine Celia. Perhaps I'll stand for a while until I get tired. Okay. No, it's fine, thanks. All right, so I made my way around Europe last year believing I'd pulled a muscle in my back, which is what the doctor told me, and it got worse and worse, and it was a compressed disc. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about a variety of things, as you've already heard, but the first thing I'd like to say is, for those who don't know, and there'll be plenty of old stalwarts I know here who do know, I've actually got a long history of association with U4. I first spoke for U4 in 1999 when Brian Dickerson, my very good and close friend, was president. And from then on, Wendy became president and so on through the years. So for a long time, I spoke quite regularly, and I always came over and supported as one of the few researchers in New Zealand supported U4's one-day seminars and weekend conferences, etc. So I have many friends in U4, very old, dear friends, and you know who you are. And it's been wonderful for me because I'm like a little island in New Zealand. There's Alec Newold and I really basically speaking about UFO issues, and so being able to come over here and mix with people and associate and discuss has been absolutely invaluable to me for 20 years, so thank you. Okay, so that's my book, and we'll move on. So just running through a few slides very quickly, because today's speech is part of what I'm doing with all of the information that I have. I have a lot of conscious memory of contact. And so what I'm doing is I'm developing different speeches along different lines. And one of the ones I developed is the technology speech, only part of which I'm showing you today for a variety of reasons. But there are also what I call my spiritual and my alien human agenda speeches, which are on my YouTube channel, Suzy Hansen channel. So I'm just going to show you a few images from those speeches just to bring you up to speed with the background. So I've had contact since childhood. Of course, as a child, I didn't associate it as aliens because I was growing up in the 50s and 60s and at high school in the early 70s. And you didn't hear much about that. We heard about flying saucers and stuff like that. And there were a lot of sightings in the 50s and 60s and 70s in New Zealand, but it was very divisive and a lot of people were not too curious about it. But as a child, I used to see these golden beings by my bed. I didn't know what they were, but I knew that they weren't the angels or the spirit people that my mother thought they might be visiting me, because right from very early childhood, I had all those mediumship skills of seeing colours around people, having precognition, and sometimes knowing what people were thinking, which was often different to what they were saying. And also seeing and communicating with spirit people. So these were tiny, they had big heads, I didn't see any features. Maybe they didn't want to frighten me as a child. They would tell me they were taking me somewhere, and then I wouldn't remember anymore until the next minute I'm climbing back into my bed and they're saying goodbye and thank you very much. But separate from that, I had these memories of what I thought were dreams, of being in white rooms and playing with other children, playing with unusual looking children, which I now know of course were ETs, and human children as well, learning to levitate objects, to communicate telepathically, to play games with objects in the air, making them more and more intricate, more and more challenging, and these were learnt off the other children right from babyhood. When I was 8, I had a profound experience where I was taken by a grey into a room, a couple of greys, 3 of them actually, into a room and told, it is time for you to meet some souls who are going to be associated with your life because you have certain things to do in your life. And even though you're young, you are going to meet some of these souls now who will play an integral part. Some of them have already incarnated and have come here in this soul light form. Others have not incarnated yet, so they are still appearing in this soul light form. and they're going to introduce themselves to you and give you a little bit of information about themselves and what will eventuate. Of course, I didn't find this easy, and I was left alone in the room with them, and that blue ball of light on my shoulder was the soul of the son that I would eventually have. When they returned and I'd sort of communicated with them, and I described this in a chapter in my book, they thanked me, and in order to do that, they suddenly began articulating a crystalline sound. I don't remember seeing them open their mouths like, oh, or anything like that. It was just seemed to come out from a slit between their lips or projected into the air by their consciousness. I don't know which, I don't remember that much detail. But from their bodies, this pinkish mist came out momentarily with this crystalline sound. And what really surprised me at the age of 8 was I looked down at my white pajamas and saw that there was a pink mist coming out of me as well. And at that point, I felt as if I had two heads, two minds. I was two people, and they had previously explained to me a few months earlier the concept of the dual soul, which I describe in depth in my book, and I'm not going to be talking about that today, just briefly here. So that was the first realization I had that there was something else, some other part of me that was melded and molded as part of my soul that allowed me to communicate in depth with them through consciousness and to be a part of their hive mind at times. And when I was 28 and very shortly before the birth of my first child, they did a merging procedure on the craft where they brought that blue ball of light in that was the soul of my son-to-be, and he was merged with my body and the body of the baby inside me. And again, later on, this was in 2010 through to 2012, I found myself on board craft lecturing to soul lights. So here's this repetition of the appearance of people and souls and in the form of a ball of coloured light according to their frequency. And on this occasion, all of those souls you can see there were going to be people who would lose their lives very soon in tragic earth tragedies. And of course we had the Christchurch earthquake followed by the Japanese tsunami, and then a whole raft of other things, tragedies that happened after that. And prior to this happening, I was lecturing to these souls and asking them if they would return to a grey craft when they passed over, and instead of going to the field of consciousness to lie there and rest for maybe hundreds of thousands of years before choosing another life, they were being asked to go there, train on what is needed on planet Earth and incarnate very quickly to keep that progression of evolution going on into the future. So people who think that this is going to be an ascension where we'll wake up one day, something amazing will happen, the earth will flip, everything will be joyous, this is a long process. Dr. Rudy Schild is an astrophysicist, now an emeritus astrophysicist, so he is retired but is still able to go and use all their equipment at Harvard. He contributed to my book, and once I got hold of his contact details, I asked him if he would have a look at some of the material I had about space and help me to understand it, because I am not a scientist. I don't profess to be, even though that's the kind of speech I'm giving today. I'm not a scientist myself. And I wasn't sure whether he would reply, but I had the feeling he was a very honourable man, which he is, and he did reply. We worked through a process of looking at some chapters, and he said, I understand all of this in terms of physics. This is really interesting, so send me the chapters, one or two chapters that you think is going to stretch me way too far, and I'll have a look at those. So I sent 2 through to him, really thinking that he might reply and say, thank you very much, this ends here. But he said, these ones are the ones that I understand the most, and I'd like to be part of your book. I did not ask him to be part of my book, he offered, and I was very grateful because he helped me to understand a lot of things, but he also put me in touch with other scientists and other experiencers. Okay, in February of this year, I was asked to speak at the International UFO Congress in the States, in Phoenix, 1,200 people there. That's only half of the auditorium that you can see there. That's me, that little dot up the front. And for the first time ever, I was actually asked to really define some of my information down to one aspect, and that was the new physics of consciousness and intelligent light, which is my phrase. They just wanted to know about the alien technology. Not all the spiritual stuff, not all the agenda stuff. And I thought this was probably because of the little soft disclosure bits and pieces coming out of the Pentagon, and they were going to be having Alessandro speaking on Skype later in the day. So I thought they were just building up that trend in the conference. But as it turned out, it did me a real favour, because afterwards I was approached by quite a number of scientists who were there, who gave me a lot of information and who I'm still communicating with over Skype. You'll see one of them has given me his entire PowerPoint, which relates to something I'll be talking about today. And I think that we need to realise, I don't think we do realise so much in Australia and New Zealand, how many scientists are involved in this subject. Certainly in the States now, it's a very different atmosphere. People don't want to hear airy-fairy stuff. I got told all the time, we liked your speech because there was detail and there was some meat in it and there was some facts in it. We're sick of hearing the airy-fairy stuff. We want something that is more tangible. And that's a real departure, even though there is very much also the New Age intrusion happening into the field. There's also the demand for something a bit more concrete. So here we go, just leading up to talking about certain incidents on the craft. We'll look at a few slides. So Michio Kaku, the theoretical physicist in the States, said, what we usually consider as impossible are simply engineering problems. There's no law of physics preventing them. So things that we once thought of as gospel, we've now been stretched to find that there's avenues here and there's avenues there and there's levels here and there's levels there. We're really getting to see a much bigger picture than what science has presented to us in the past. So talking to my good friend Gary Heseltine in the UK, we talked at a conference in Toronto together about, well, what is evidence? Because Gary's very hot on evidence, being a former detective in the UK. And putting it in layman's terms, these are actually 5 legal aspects of what is acceptable in a court of law in terms of evidence, but I've just put them in layman's terms. Real evidence, tangible things like a weapon. So many skeptics will say, well, why can't you bring something back off the craft? Really? That is very naive, and it really is a facile argument that they put forward to people like myself, because you're never going to get off a craft with something in your pocket, and it's usually your pajamas or your nightgown anywhere, and there's nowhere to put it. So there are scanners, they can read your mind, they know exactly what you're doing, what you've done and what you're going to do, so why would they allow that to happen unless they wanted it to at some stage? So that one just doesn't compute for experiencers. We're up against walls with each of these 5 things. So a demonstrative piece of evidence like charts, graphs, photos. No, same thing. We don't take a camera on board. We're gone in the night or from a particular place in the daytime, and we don't have that opportunity. Documentary evidence like a letter, a document, an invite onto the craft, something like that. No, that doesn't count either. Testimonial, witness testimony. Yes, there's plenty of witness testimony. But because of the very vague, almost etheric aspect to many contacts, how do you encapsulate something that is tangible in that witness testimony? Even when I began speaking about my experiences back in 1989 in New Zealand, I felt very self-conscious and almost, like a fool on many occasions. I had this burning commitment to do it, but at the same time it was embarrassing to me on many occasions because of the expressions on the people listening and the whole aspect that it was sleep paralysis or you're completely nuts, you've got a vivid imagination or whatever. So for the last 44 years, which is how long I've been in UFO sighting investigations in New Zealand and in contact research in New Zealand, so it's a very long time, I have been searching for corroborative evidence, which is the last one, supportive evidence. Because there's a lot of very familiar aspects to contacts that a lot of people can talk about. Very, very broad things about what a room might look like, you know, it's white, it's sterile or whatever. But the very detailed aspects of particular technology, particular implements, particular pieces of apparatus or ways of doing things, those are much more specific. And to find someone who can say exactly the same as as you describe it is very difficult, and it's taken me years. Okay, so while we're going through these experiences I'm going to talk about today, I want you to think about the role of telepathy, sentiency, and consciousness in alien technology. Because our technology, you plug it into the wall or you charge up a battery, you start up a diesel motor or whatever to make the technology work in general, but we are moving forward in that, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But in alien technology, you're relying heavily on telepathic instruction, sentiency, so tapping into the organic aspect of the craft, tapping into what I call the big brain of the craft and using consciousness to run that technology. And at the same time, I want you to think about the role of spirituality and consciousness in our future technology, because that's the way we're going. We're becoming a telepathic society. So let's have a look at the new physics of consciousness and intelligent light. We've gone through some sudden advances in technology in the last, say, specifically the last 10 to 15 years. Before that, of course, with the Industrial Revolution, we've had a huge jump, but more recently it's tripled, quadrupled, etc. So we have this new physics that scientists are talking about that involves consciousness and other aspects of physics that are not well known to the general public. And looking at some of the technology that's coming out in our world, is it following the same path or line in physics as what the ETs have got, as what experiencers talk about in their dialogue, that things that they have seen and experienced? Are we following that same path towards that same technology? Or is it ET intervention? Are we being fed information? Are scientists being fed ideas and information? And certainly I believe that is the case, because I've witnessed it on craft. I have seen scientists in an altered state being instructed and given what I call thought seeds into their mind that will open up in the future. Is some of this being gained from experiencers, contactees and abductees? Yes. I know some experiencers in the States who are involved quietly behind the scenes with new energy technology, and they don't talk publicly. Is it back-engineered technology from craft? Yes, I would say undoubtedly that is too, and you'll see some evidence of that later on. Is it leaked technology from the ETs? Yes. Military black government deals? Yes, undoubtedly there's that in the mix as well. Or is it just all plain natural evolution that we go through as a growing society, evolving, that we go through these stages? It could be any of those or a combination of the lot. So we're going to look at some consciousness-assisted quantum or 3D technology, some space discoveries, some light and anti-gravity. Now, this is an experience I have talked about at U4 before, but I'm casting a new light on it and I'm adding in some corroborative evidence that I've come across since I last spoke to you. In my book, this is chapter 29 and 30 called The Test, and this happened in 1993. There were no computers in homes in New Zealand in 1993. I didn't touch a computer until 1998, and that was when I used a Word document. And in 1993, there was nothing. 1995, we had a few coming in, and we had them in universities, medical hospitals, etc., in institutions like that, but not in the home. That's the first piece of technology you can see there, 16 humans and some greys going along a corridor. which seemed to light up around you as you walked. No light sources, dark in front of you, dark behind you. Were there sensors? Was it something to do with our consciousness igniting something in the air? I don't know. We were met by two elders, one with a cone-shaped head, one with the very deep furrows. There were small greys in the room. There were quite a lot of greys in the room because this was a test of significance, and usually those elders up the front don't turn up unless it's a significant event. So 16 humans were being tested, and we were given each a task to do, and each task was different, but of equal difficulty, so no one had an advantage over anyone else. And the test was not to see whether you could pass or fail the question or task that you were given to do. The actual test involved whether or not you could use what they had taught you and the technology that you were presented with to complete the test. So it was a test of your capabilities using consciousness and all of those other things you'd learnt since childhood. So the 16 of us, this was a very important test that they were doing on this occasion. We were assigned a partner, a small grey, to sit with us, and he gave each person a download of material. So we're talking about volumes and volumes of, say, encyclopedias in terms of volume that was put into your head for you to be able to access. And that symbol on the screen there is a symbol that encapsulated everything they know about me to that point. Okay, so here's the first little piece of corroborative evidence when you see the word tablet. Now, tablets have become very commonplace to us. Most people have got a tablet, small laptop or something like that. But this was 1993, and we were given a small tablet with slightly rounded edges, which my husband hasn't achieved there on Photoshop. But it was very thin, like very thin plastic. It was flexible, you could bend it and shake it. But embedded within that very thin plastic were these images. And those images were alive. Some of them seemed to be alive in that they were standing out from this sheet of plastic, which I now know to be 3D. But in 1993, the only way I could describe it was to say the pictures were standing out in the air. And I still have my old speech DVDs and videos. I still have my written explanations of what I saw at this time. And that's how I described it, because I had no other terminology at that time. There were two boxes of script on mine. There was a single planet up to the top left, bottom right. There was like a chart of an axis between planets or points. And there was a group of 3 planets down the bottom with magnetic fields surging around them. My job was to find the way from one of those planets past the other to the last planet without disturbing their magnetic fields. Okay, so while I was doing this, I was able to access not only the information that had been put into my head, which incidentally I could just go through like this. Could I do that here? No. But that's what you do. You just bring it into the mind and you go through it. And when something feels right, you stop and you look at it more closely. But you're not looking with your eyes, you're looking with your consciousness. It's all there around you, in your mind, in your auric field or whatever. That's where it is. It lies in consciousness, in your association with that technology and the craft. And you'll note my right hand is on a rubber pad that connected me to what I call the big brain of the craft. And you'll see out in front of me, this is a very old drawing my husband did a long time ago. He could not, of course, on a flat surface create a 3D image, but that is some data and script and a diagram that I had decided to describe to him that I'd chosen to bring out and look at closer. So he's drawn it that way to show that you could just bring out a part of that information and look at it more closely. I could also access information through the computer itself, which was like what I now know to be a massive internet, an alien internet. And the little grey you can see standing there beside me, purring away as mine's ticking away, he was giving me bits of information along the way, so I was having to also absorb what he was saying. He was not helping me to cheat or anything like that, but he was adding to the information, because at every possible moment, certainly the greys I have had contact with will educate you at every possible opportunity. And because my task was to find my way through a group of planets without disturbing their magnetic fields, he was talking about ribbons in space. So he was adding to the information. And he said that there were ribbons of energy through space, and he commented that thousands of aircraft traverse our skies daily, and we will eventually understand the harmless disturbance to natural energy fields is causing to life on Earth, affecting our health and nervous systems, as well as the pollution caused by fuel consumption. But the ribbons of energy through space, he said that they ride them. They go through this. They go through these energy fields and that flow. And he said there's the macrocosm all the way down to the microcosm. So right through larger space in the galaxy, there are these fields between the magnetic fields of galaxies in the universe. And then you come all the way down to the energy field within a solar system, the tracks and ribbons there. And then you come right down to the planet itself, and in our atmosphere there are the same tracks and ribbons of energy caused by climatic situations, by the turning of our planet, by strange energy emissions from our planet in certain places, etc. So they ride these and they surf them and they use them, the natural flows, so as not to cut across that flow and create a disturbance and a repercussion. So going back there, and just see where I'm going next. Yes, you'll see that there's 2 boxes of script. Now, a lot of experiencers talk about being able to read script, and I'm sure that they can, because I believe, I don't know how others feel, but I believe that much of the script that people say they can read is actually a bridging script. I think it contains, as Jim Sparks has said, I think it contains aspects of some of our ancient scripts and hieroglyphs, etc., but it also contains an input from the ETs. And can be grouped or can sit singly, and so how it is presented is of importance. And if you think about a website page, you will go onto the internet and you'll go to a website, and everything will be positioned on that website for you to enter it in some way. So then you might click on something on that website, say another page, and you'll go into that, and it will be positioned in a particular place. You'll go into that. Then you might click on a link or another page, and so on. You'll go deeper and deeper into that website to obtain information. Well, this is very similar to this. You focus on the script, and using your mind, you travel into the script. So it's like going down a tunnel of information, and you can go left and right, and you can drag something from here, something from there, and you can stop and look at that bit on the way. So it is like using a website, but without the mouse or the touchpad or going to icons. You just traverse it with your consciousness. And this is where we will be going one day. Okay, so at the end of this test, there were 4 who passed, 3 males and myself. and while they went off to another part of the craft, I was asked if I would take the pile of tablets down to be cleared. And the way I did that is to travel in what I call a light elevator. So you have a perspex like sometimes clear tube of light. There's a door that swings back and you step into it. It has no floor. It is light that's going up and down at the same time, usually blue and white. And you step into it, you think of a symbol, and away you go to that part of the craft that has that symbol attached to it. When you step into it, it is rather like stepping into a form of water, but it's light. You can feel it on your skin, and it's rather like getting into a tepid pool that is blood temperature, so that when you get into it, you can feel that softness on your skin, which is the water, but you can't feel cold or hot. It's just, you're just aware of that liquid feeling. And on the screen there behind the female entity at a console, you'll see there's like a screen or a window, and within that there was a dome. And in that dome there was foliage, seats, a little path that looked as if it had been designed by humans for humans on a craft. There was like an artificial sunlight in there, and a grey and a human walking and probably conversing telepathically. What they were doing there, I don't know. How long the grey could remain in that environment, I don't know. Whether it was an artificial sunlight for humans spending long periods of time on the craft, I don't know, but that's what it seemed like to me. And I asked the female entity about it, and she said, oh, you don't need to see that, and just like that, the screen or window became a wall. You could see no evidence of edges or where the screen or the image had gone. It was just a wall. And this is very common on the craft, where it just transfers to something else. At that point, I heard a noise behind me and saw this entity coming out of a doorway. He was carrying some tablets also. He was a hybrid, so he was mainly grey, a little bit of human, and he had very unusual eyes, and he projected this massive emanation of power, consciousness, intelligence, empathy, all of those things rolled into one, so that it was so powerful it nearly bowled me over. I was very impressed by this, and I asked what seemed at the time probably like a rather selfish or even silly question, but it turned out to be the best question I could ever have asked. And I said to him, do you have some advice for my future? And he looked at me with these eyes, and yes, in your eyes it probably would look better if the slit went downways, and that's how my husband originally drew it, because he thought it looked better. And I said, no, I'm sorry, you'll have to draw the eyes again. And he said, I can't, I'll have to do the whole picture, which was about so big. And I said, well, I'm sorry, you didn't listen to what I said, and what I say is how it was. And if I'm going to put this image up, it has to be how it was. So he had to draw many hours of shading and drawing the image again to get that slit the right way. And why it was like that, I don't know, but it was stunning to look at. And so in answer to my question, I got back a simple word, corroboration. And I was a little disappointed, actually, because I thought I might get something a lot more profound than that. So I thanked him, and he went off, and I went back up in a lift and joined the others. But it wasn't until some years later when I found my first piece of corroboration of what I have seen with another experiencer. And I mean detailed stuff, not just someone who says, oh yeah, I've seen that. Detailed information, that I realised the importance of this word, because this is the one and only strand at the moment that experiencers have as proof and validation that they've been there, they've done these things, they've seen these things, and they've used this information. But will it still be believed by those outside of the field? I don't know. But it is a very, very important starting point. And I have started up a database of experiencers who've seen specific technology who are now contacting me from around the world and giving me details, so that if someone else comes along with that information, I can put them in touch. Okay, so let's go quickly back and look at the information contained in this one event, now corroborated by other experiencers and validated by new scientific discoveries. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so the tablet. We now have a tablet. I've already talked about that. And I described it as a thin, flexible information tablet, no visible power source, 3D images, holographic images, and could be inserted into a larger computer like we would use a USB. And now in 2013, I saw in the New Zealand Herald that they are beginning to develop prototypes of a laptop or a tablet that can be rolled up, tucked in your pocket. It's flexible. They've already produced a prototype that can be powered for a short time. Now they're working on powering it for a much longer time, almost endlessly. Now, as an experiencer and a little housewife and mother in New Zealand, how would I have known about these technologies back then in 1993? So you can see how far we've moved in a very short space of time. So were the ETs introducing this technology to humans, groups of humans on the craft, getting you familiar with it, seeing how well we can take it, seeing what we can absorb, seeing if we can master these things with a view to releasing more of this through scientists onto the planet? Or are we just following the same line of physics, following along behind? So in 2010, 11, 16, 17, and right up to today, they're still developing flexible tablets, shake it to give it some power, roll it up, bendable, conductive paper, enabling flexible electronics. So holographic images that I discussed about, 3D images, mind melding into the data in a computer, syncing into that data, and the way you could display it out in front of you, holographic form, equals the use of consciousness combined with technology. And that's the way we're heading now, but theirs is much more advanced. We've got a long way to go. And Dr. Schultz said, I suspect that the technology Suzy used and witnessed was 3D, which would involve a deeper quantum development of computing closer to consciousness itself, and it would be a giant leap for our civilization. Now, getting back to the ribbons of energy through space that the Gray told me in 1993, scientists now say there is a strange ribbon of energy and particles at the edge of the solar system, which serves as a sort of roadmap in the sky for the interstellar magnetic field. That was 2009. So they're saying that interfacing with our solar system, the edge of our solar system, is this greater magnetic field coming from space that's moving and warping around our solar system. And then inside our solar system, we've got the same kind of contact going on. And in 2009, they have now named it as the IBEX ribbon, an interstellar magnetic field with ribbons of energy. Scientists discovered the ribbon in 2009 using NASA's Interstellar Boundary Explorer IBEX spacecraft, which orbits Earth but looks out to the edge of the solar system. The ribbon is made up of particles that come from heliopause, which is the boundary where the influence of the sun's magnetic field bumps up against the interstellar medium. So a solar system, any solar system. Or within the solar system, planets and the magnetic fields around planets. Or just as the Gray said, going into the atmosphere within our own magnetic field and what is moving and ribboning round within our atmosphere. So here we have absolute concrete confirmation of what that Gray told me in 1993. And there's a NASA image. You can see the yellow-green there is the way that the part of what they've photographed, if I can put it that way, and graphed of this swirling, moving ribbon. Many ribbons out there, not just one. And this is a model of the interstellar magnetic fields wrapping around the outside of our heliosphere based on the IBEX data. The Gray also said that aircraft cause harmful disturbances in our skies. It affects our health and nervous systems, it causes pollution, and of course uses excess fuel consumption. And in 2016 in the New Zealand Herald, I found this image taken by a satellite using high-speed photography, high definition of the testing of a rocket. And you can see there that is the shock waves going out from the rocket. Goes out vastly into our atmosphere, and if you think of the thousands of aircraft, massive aircraft traversing our atmosphere and our skies every day, this is the kind of disturbance that he was talking about. Maybe one day we'll go like this around the planet using that, that ribbon of energy that exists in the macrocosm right down to the microcosm. And depth reading script, what I call depth reading alien script, is this an advanced form of perceptual or intuitive learning? So on the right you can see computer with lots of data on it. We are faced with so much data today, we don't know anymore what is what and how to access what we really want, because we go on Google and there's so much stuff. We could waste a whole day and then another day going through all the things that Google coughs up onto our screen trying to find what we want. And we can redefine our search words until we're absolutely infuriated and we give up and walk away because it's just too hard. Well, every day that data on the internet gets greater and greater and greater. So how do the young people of the future manage to traverse this? How do they decide what they need and what they don't need? What is right for whatever their question or study is? So I have discovered that in some universities in the States, particularly Berkeley University and others, they're taking groups of students and they're training them in intuitive learning. So they are given huge rafts of data to look at. They're given it in different forms, be it on a computer screen or books or leaflets or summaries of things in folders or whatever, in all different forms, and they're asked to just feel the energy. Does it feel right? Does that feel like it's associated with the topic I'm studying? No. Okay, not that one. Next one, please. Yes, that feels right. So what are we using here? We are using frequency. We're using frequency, using our intuition to tell us what it is we need. So I'm just briefly going to describe this incident. A 7-year-old boy that I observed on craft being given hundreds and hundreds of images that came up on a screen behind him. He couldn't see it. I could see it. The grey could see it. So he was given hundreds of images. And this was a demonstration to me of how the very young children are being super trained on the craft. They're being super trained in these skills that we're just cottoning on to. So he's given hundreds of images and they were in sets. So think mathematically, think a set A, set B, set C. Each set has got hundreds of images. They were transferred into his brain with a download from a grey. He was then asked to reorder them. So the grey may have said, okay, I want all the mountains that have got blue sky behind them first in that set, and then you can put the rest after that. So in his consciousness and mind, he had to reassess the whole lot, redo it, and then he had to project them from his mind using a touchpad onto a computer. And it all flashed on the screen in its new format, and the grey had a look flashing so that it's so fast it's almost a blur, and the grey says, yes, that's good, you got that right. Well, how many of us could do that? So what was the child doing? Was the child at lightning speed looking at every single image and all the details in it? Was he doing that? Or was he using the frequency coming off each of those images? If the grey said blue sky, blue has a frequency, frequency, frequency. So this is what the child was doing. He was actually doing this intuitive stuff that they're now experimenting with in American universities. So here's a rough picture of it. So the grey gives them a whole lot of information. We've got 5 flowers there that actually represents like hundreds of pictures. Gives it to the child then puts it in a different order, transfers it to the computer, registering a vast amount of images at lightning speed, reordering the set, and transferring them to the computer. And the information is transferred as frequencies, which, like brained minds, this is me talking in my book, can mentally view as imagery. So the frequency is transferred and the computer transfers his frequency to the image. And if I was to give you my speech on this, because I do a whole speech on this, then you would be learning more about what they're doing at Berkeley and University, backed by DARPA, of course, to get into this mind stuff where we are mapping the brain and we are creating videos of the brain and we are learning to see into each other's minds, and there's a danger in that. Remember my slide up there, think about the spirituality and consciousness in our future technology. There's huge dangers coming up. The ETs don't use the danger aspect. It's all let's learn and do something different, but we have a different nature, don't we? And so he's just converting a frequency. Purple equals yellow daisy. Okay, so back to that again, we're finished with that. And the light elevator. I was 12 when I first used one on my own, sitting there putting my feet into it, but scared to get into it on my own. Nearly always travelled with another, with a grey, but had to do it myself at that stage. Same look about it. And then when I was researching a speech that I was giving overseas, I typed in liquid light in Mr. Google, and Mr. Google came up with this image. I nearly fell over. Hello, there's my picture. So I contacted this man called Jeff in the States through the website and said, is this for real? You know, is this something you remember from an experience, or did you just draw it out of your imagination? He came back and said, no, this is from an experience on board craft in 1997. And so I wrote back and said, well, can you tell me about it? Because I think I've seen something similar or the same. So he wrote back. I said, be as detailed as you can. So he wrote back and said, oh, well, it's like velvet on the skin. It's like stepping into water, but it's blue and white light. It's flashing and crackling. It makes a humming noise. All the things that I had written and documented and talked about earlier on in my speeches. So this was the first piece of real corroboration for me. Not just trends of things that you see and do on craft, but a really specific piece of information that could not be disputed. I will front up to any skeptic who says, well, you've had some kind of joint hallucination. Because this guy lives in the States, I've never met him. And I still have his emails as proof. And he was able to state things in exactly the same manner as I did, even down to the words that we would use to describe something like this. And when I was speaking here in Australia to an experiencer group in 2005, a young girl, her name is not Anne, that's just a pseudonym, she showed me some images that she'd had from her experiences with her mother, and I asked her, well, what's that one? And she said, well, it's a tubular column and it's got bright, soft, sparkling light and it transports you elsewhere. I call it the transporter. And I said, oh, yeah, and what is it like to travel in it? She said, well, it's like stepping into velvet. Same words that Jeff and I used. And there you are. Can we doubt that those are the same elevator? And Dr. Schuld said the light elevator is almost certainly an anti-gravity device involving magneto-electric influence on gravity under thought control in interaction with the conscious intent of the enveloped sentient beings. That's the sentient beings that travel in it and tell it, I want to go to floor C, please. And in 2016, while further searching for more corroboration, I came across they are now developing liquid light technology at the University of Cambridge, UK. So I immediately wrote to Rudy, Dr. Schuld, and said, listen, Rudy, does this sound anything like what I'm talking about? And he said, absolutely, Suzy, this is just the beginning. And what they have done is they had some kind of condensed water that they endowed with light, and it took on a whole new form. And let's look at the 5-function screen. That screen could be a wall, it could be a window, a communication or display screen, a surveillance screen looking into other parts of the craft or another craft. And it was also an access to a mammoth database, which she called an information storage facility, I would call an internet. And when I spoke in Perth in 2003, I had dinner with the late Dr. Roger Lear, who was also speaking, and during the course of our conversation that night, the night before my speech, he started talking about a military person he had interviewed and talked to in the States who described being taken on board a captured craft at an Air Force base in the States. And one of the things they saw appeared to be a window they could see outside. And when they once they were all inside, then the person taking them through, showing them features, transferred it and it became a screen. And so the military guy asked further about it, and he was told it has 5 functions. So I said to Dr. Lear, can I use that in my speech tomorrow? And he said, yes, by all means. So that's more corroborative evidence of another person who has seen a 5-function screen. Okay, now moving on to this next one, we're going to have a look at some potential medical and healing technology. You hear a lot of experiencers talk about healing technology on the craft, but often it's very short on detail. Excuse me, grease the wheels. So in 1978, I was taken on a craft and I'd recently had a horrendous accident, and they took me on a number of times to do certain things to me to help me out. They said they couldn't fix me. They were not allowed to fix me. It was not their role to do that, but they could assist me along the way. So I was lying on my back on a shelf bed, and the grey was running this thing up and down my body. It was rectangular with a handle, a bit like a bat. Rows of square red and white lights shone a beam of light. It emitted a mild electric current or sensation, and he told me it could see into my body. That was intriguing, but I was lying flat, so I wasn't able to see what he was talking about. And it was used to scan parts of the body, and he could send data and images to a greater computer so that they would have all of these details about me or anyone else. And that's what it looked like. So, as I said, a bit like a bat, and it had this reddish light shining out from it. I don't recall whether there were buttons or anything on it, or whether he just instructed telepathically, so my husband hasn't drawn anything on there. And the underside, which I could see, looked roughly like that and was emitting a pinkish red light. When I spoke at the Alien Cosmic Expo in Canada last year, there was a complete whole day of just experiencers meeting and talking. A real room full, like the whole auditorium. There'd be more people than there were here. And one by one, people who wanted to talk got up and had a chat about what they may have experienced. And this very nice man, Steve Boucher, got up and talked about some technology he had seen. And afterwards, I went up to him, and I actually went up on the stage and corroborated what he had seen, which he was very delighted about, and I was very excited to have heard what he said. Because back in 1982, his experience where he saw this technology happened in 1971, but it wasn't until 1982 that the QFON, the Canadian UFO Research Network in Canada, wrote about it in their bulletin. And they gave him the pseudonym Jack. And he described a grey coming up to him on board a craft and asking him what was wrong with his arm, shining some light down from a handheld object that showed the bone, only the bone. Within that dark patch that he's drawn there on the arm, it went from the vascular system to the bone, you know, to the muscular system, etc. The grey could just change the frequency of the apparatus so that he could see something different in the body. Well, in 2013, another piece of corroborative evidence, Epson and Avena Medical unveiled smart glasses that allow nurses to see through a patient's skin to the vascular beneath. So they shine an near-infrared light onto the skin, and it bounces off the hemoglobin and allows them to see where veins are for people who are difficult to find or whatever. And that's what they now look like. They call them vein viewers. And let's see, Paul, if we can make this work. No sound, Paul? Doesn't matter because you can see what's happening. And this is actually in Australia. I think it's the Red Cross are trialling them now. They're right throughout the US. And these handheld implements, it's the first step to seeing into the body. It's actually a reflection off the hemoglobin, but it is the first step to seeing into the body. Whereas the ET's version of it, much more advanced, of course, could actually see into the body. No, it's good, thank you. So fine. And so now there's a whole raft of those have come out since 2007, around about there. And you can see the similarity. You've got my image on the right and the bottom right, Steve's in the middle there. Up the top left, you've got the underside of one with a red light. Bottom left, you've got it showing up the veins in the body. So we're moving in that direction. How would Steve and I have known that? Steve in 1971 and me in 1978 seeing this kind of stuff. How would we know that? In 1978, I was taught to do a rather different kind of thing to see into the body, where we were in a room and humans were sort of given a hologram each of a human body floating in the air. And these were images taken with scans, again on a craft, of human subjects come in, lying on beds, and are scanned. And then we were basically given these images, which were sort of live, if you know what I mean. So they could activate them in the air as if that person was lying there in front of you. And you would see the auric field. You could actually take your consciousness into the body. You could take it into the auric field and move around in the different colours. And they told us, forget all the medical stuff you know and everything you ever learned, because you're not using that here. Because some of the humans were saying, I can't do this because I'm not a doctor and I don't know about these things. I don't know enough. And I was saying, forget that. You're using frequency, you're using sentiency, you're using your intuitive abilities, your psychic abilities to go into that auric field and find places where there's pressure, find places where there's a glitch, find places it doesn't feel right. And later on, we were taught to go right into the body, and we'll come to that in a minute. And the first exercise they gave us to do that was to put like a potted plant in front of four of us, foreign plants to me, but to go into the tip of the leaf structure and down through the veins of the leaf, down through the stem, down through the complete stem of the plant, into the knob above the root, and then down into the root, and be able to feel what that was like. Feel the constriction, feel the flow, or whatever. So there we are in 1996, the same sort of thing again, where we were tested about how well we'd learnt this and what we could do, and we had to find what was wrong with a person. And this is just a Photoshop mock-up, but on this occasion I was looking at a lady who had a kidney problem, and as soon as I had assessed that, and as soon as it came into my mind, the image, the hologram in the air just rolled over like that, and there was a red mark above the kidney, over the kidney, to show like a big tick. Yes, you got that right. So very, very complex situations on board craft that humans been trained to do. So are they leading us towards our future? But in 1983, that was the time I really saw the big one of this machinery apparatus, and I'd been taken on a craft once again, my physical status being checked out, because like many experiencers, I have an autoimmune problem, rheumatoid arthritis. I've had horrific car accident, all sorts of things, nearly died 6 times now. Some miraculous little intervention happens at the last minute and I pull through and I think, oh God, why couldn't I have just gone? But here I am again. And in 1983 was one of those times. I was taken on board the craft with my son, and he thought it was hilarious. He pulled up this little seat kind of thing on a pedestal, and he and a small grey child stood up on it so they could look into my body. And he just thought it was hilarious. Children are much more relaxed on a craft than adults, and I remember being much more relaxed on a craft than as I got older, because as you get older you become aware of what you're part of, and you take it much more seriously. So the interaction changes a little bit, but there's still that humour there with them. So on this occasion they said, right, we're going to look into your body so you can get up on your elbows and have a look. So I did. After they shone that on my rib cage, they said, okay, sit up. So I pushed up on my elbows, had a good look at my ribs, and then they would just touch a little screen and it would go to the vascular system, the organs, or whatever. They can stretch that light out. It comes from a circle on the ceiling, but it can just go out like that. It can encompass the whole body. It can go right down really tiny and right in on a very tiny aspect of an organ or whatever and blow it up on a screen. So what are we doing now? Well, this is from the www.anatomage.com website, where we've now produced something called an anatomage table, which is used in many medical schools. I think it may have been developed in Edinburgh, but so they've taken images and scans, very expensive, in-depth scans of human cadavers who've donated their body to science, and so now medical students can look at the vascular system, look at the bones, etc., as part of their teaching. Now, we'll see if the next one can work. Is it going to work? No, it's not going to work. Never mind, we'll move on to the next one. Okay, it is working. This is an annoying little GIF. You'll probably get sick of it after a few seconds, but it gives you some idea now. www.haloxica.com. You can look up, and a lot of medical people now have these apps on their phones and tablets. I went to the physiotherapist for my back injury, and she was showing me images like this of the nerve that I'd managed to pinch in my back, etc. So we've already moved into this arena now, but it's not real time yet. Until now. So when I was at the UFO Congress, I had this delightful man come up to me afterwards and said, "You need to talk to me." And he turned out to be an oncologist specialist from the States, and he sells. No, he doesn't really sell. He goes around and he talks about this machinery, and it is being put into US hospitals. I think there's 5 now in US hospitals. And it's intervention radiology. So he has given me his entire PowerPoint, and I've put some of the images in for you to look today. Because he said, this is the closest we've got so far to what you're talking about the ETs use, Suzy. This is the closest we've got, this technology. So if we have a look at that, you can see the grey area is where the person lies. You've got a lot of complex equipment, and you've got that white bit, which I'll point out. Am I attached? No, that's good. Here, that scans the body, and you see a little lever hanging down there, white one hanging down. That's what the surgeon holds onto. So it's still a little bit archaic compared to what the ETs have got, but he can pull the scanner along over the body, etc., takes a scan, and up on the screen behind you'll see there's an aqua-coloured image there, and that's an aqua-coloured, that's a real-time image of the person's vascular system. So this is used for bleeds. When a person's had an operation, they come out, they go to the recovery room, they go into shock because they've got a bleed. Now, normally they might have had 7 hours surgery already, and they have to rush them back in, and they have to open them up and look for that bleed. So this, they put them on here, they scan them straight away, and they can find it much quicker. They can go in, they can close it off and save the person's life, because he said to me so many people have lost their lives over the years by them not being able to get to that bleed quickly enough. you will see here what they see in real time. So with the scanner, it can do a 3D scan right round the body. You can see the spinal cord, you can see a bit of the ribs there, you can see the vascular system, and the top one is, has got a wire going up through the artery or vein, and they're able to stop the bleed. And there you can see it a bit closer. So we are creeping closer to what I saw in 1978 and earlier, where you can see into the body in real time while a person is alive and lying there on the table. And you can go in and save that person's life very quickly or assess what the problem is. You can zero in on an organ, zero in on whatever, and take action. So there we have the two pieces of machinery. The greys have got this circle on the ceiling that shines this beam of something down. And no doubt there's a lot of technology behind that creates that beam of light that I don't know about. But, and then we've got millions and millions of dollars to formulate that machinery there. But we are moving in that direction. Now, how would I'll repeat again, as an experiencer in the 70s, how would I understand these things and be able to understand the concept of seeing into the body, observing this and experiencing this technology for myself when we are only just developing it ourselves now? And incidentally, this occurred on a very large craft, a very large Saturn-shaped craft. And there were some particular aspects of this craft that are interesting. So I was taken on board this craft in a smaller one, and we were taken through those archways there, and that whole flange around the craft is actually the hangar. It encircles the craft, and dozens and dozens of smaller craft can go in there. Then you go into the exterior of the craft, and it's multi-leveled. So it's like a great big city hanging in the sky or in space. But the particular thing about this object was that flange across the top there, which you can see is that stripe across the middle that is very light, just above the hangar doors. Now, it's light because from the outside it could be metal that you can't see through, or in this case, metal that you can see through. Metal that can be opaque and shine light out through it. And when you go inside the hangar, as I did, got out of the small craft, you could see through the ceiling. And that's why I got my husband to draw it light like that, because you could see through the ceiling out into space or out into the atmosphere. And on each end, you can see it's a bit brighter on the left and right. And that's because you're looking through that glass, and it's bright light in there, and through the metal rather on the other side. And it's not quite so bright in the middle because you've got the interior of the craft behind it. Now, when I was researching for my speech in Canada, I came across the 1986 JAL 1628 sighting near Anchorage, Alaska, and some of you who are familiar with the old sightings will know about this one, where Captain Kenju Terauchi and his crew on board a large aircraft going into Alaska saw a Saturn-shaped craft. Initially they saw some small craft circling around them, going in front of them, going round under their wings, and then they did a turn to see what else they could see, and as they turned into view came this massive Saturn-shaped craft. And he writes in broken English something along the lines of, I can't remember the exact words, but it was something like, "Oh my God, big craft must get away, run away." So it was a real shock to see this thing hanging in the air. But look what he drew. And look what he drew on either side. He drew the same light bits that I did, and he says, pale white light. And in this photo, up top right, you can see that's a comparison of roughly the size of his aircraft compared to the craft. So he reported this, was brave enough to report it, was immediately taken off being captain of an aircraft and got a desk job, as happens. But we should all be very grateful to this man for speaking out about this unusual shaped craft, and I'm certainly very grateful that I found it, and here's another piece of corroboration of what I remember, right down to him seeing that lighter bit that is visible on either side as in the see-through aspect of the metal. Do we have see-through metal? Introducing Robert Salas from the USA. Many of you will know Robert, lovely man, very good friend of mine. We work together a lot. We use each other's material because we have experienced some very similar things, and we are exactly on the same wavelength, I believe. That's a photo of us taken when we spoke in Norway. And Robert contacted me recently. Actually, I'll have to find the paper. And he has since put this on his Facebook page, so you can go to his Facebook page and have a look at it. So he recently spoke in Argentina, and Robert said that he was taken to a private UFO museum where there were pieces from alleged downed craft that had come down in Argentina and South America. And I can't reveal anything more about that for obvious reasons. But the person put in writing for him regarding the case of this metal, this was an event that we cannot yet accurately establish a date of. We understand that it was between the years 1980 and 1985 when this craft came down in Argentina. 5 objects were observed in flight. One of them exploded in the air and fell to the ground. The police surrounded the area and recovered the fallen remains. The owner of the field was left with a piece of approximately 2 metres by 1.5 metres, and he took it to a metallurgist to identify what kind of metal it was. From that piece, a part of this was cut off and given to this person. They did metallographic studies, and the peculiarity of this metal is that it can become translucent. And Robert wrote, this is one of the pieces of metal that was recovered after a sighting event, and he said, Suzy, note the vertical lines along the specimen. When I held this up to the sun, it was semi-translucent, but there were no perforations in the metal to allow that light through. For example, I could see movement of objects through the metal. So he's holding the metal up, and he can see people and things moving behind it. I could see the movement of the shadow on the opposite side of the metal as people walked by between the sun and the metal. So looking at that, and this is only me surmising, this is not gospel science that I'm telling you in this here, this is me surmising as someone who's seen this kind of thing on a craft. I am wondering if the grooves are some kind of activation so that it can become almost completely see-through. Put something running through it like a current or something, it can become semi-translucent or more translucent or look like metal, look like dark metal. Because that's what I saw and was told about on this big Saturn-shaped craft, how they could adjust the light. It could just look like metal, like you can't see anything through it. It could be completely see-through and in between. And now, around 2005, we have now produced aluminium oxynitrate, or ALON as it's known. It is a ceramic composed of aluminium, oxygen and nitrogen. It's optically 80% transparent. It's 4 times harder than fused silly glass. It can be fabricated using ceramic powder processing techniques which are relatively simple. And it has combined optical and mechanical properties, which can be used in many military applications, as you can imagine. So we are now developing an aluminium that is semi-transparent, can conduct light through it, can be used for optical purposes and has mechanical properties, so it is very strong. So let's go back to the core principle, and I'll take a few questions on this half before I finish. The role of spirituality and consciousness in future technology. And what we are doing is we are fast-track developing advanced technology, but we are not fast-track developing our spirituality to go hand in hand with it. And I don't want to sound preachy here, but that is what the ETs are here to help us to do, because they understand that if they are leaking little bits to us, and certainly my experiences I've talked about today of seeing technology that's now come into being on our planet 15, 20, 25, 30 years later, it would indicate to me that they are leading us along that path, they're bringing us up to speed. But at the same time, through the complex programs of the agenda that are outlined in my book, The Spiritual Agenda, at the same time, hand in hand, they are trying to elevate our spirituality, get us working together, get us changing our ways, getting us to be interested in preserving the very planet that our feet rest on. And what have we always done in the past? Well, we have produced nuclear technology and guns and warfare techniques that can harm each other, and it's all about control. It's all about making others subservient to your will, and it's all about being the first, being the leaders and having control over vast amounts of people and humanity and society. So what we are needing to do, according to the ETs, is up our spirituality. Because if they were to come in with their technology tomorrow, such as many of us have used on a craft, people wouldn't be able to use it, and I'll tell you why. Because encompassed in this consciousness aspect is spirituality. There's consciousness with negativity and there's consciousness with positivity. We all know all the old stories about witches and witch doctors and all these people. They had consciousness with sometimes spirituality, but on other occasions with negativity. So they have told us that our spirituality is really in the boondocks. And they described it to me as being in the muddy eddies of a river. So you have a lovely river, and in the middle is a deep channel. The water is fast moving, it's crystal clear, it's lovely, you could drink it, and off it goes down to the ocean. But on either side of that river there may be the muddy eddies, the trees that have fallen, and some dead animals there. Someone's thrown their chip packet and there's an old tyre. And there's mosquitoes breeding. That's where we are. So in order for us to use their technology, we need that spirituality. It won't function. And when you go on a craft, they say to you, raise up, raise up, raise up. And it gets to the point when you're a teenager or about 12 years old, they don't need to say that to you anymore. Because when you go on the craft, you automatically, you expand outwards, 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 and you raise your frequency in order to be able to operate and match what's on the craft. And if you are not leading a spiritual life and you're a bad egg, you won't operate the stuff, and they'll say, sorry, put you in another program now doing something different. And I think this is what we need to grasp. There are so many people that I talk to who are so afraid of AI, artificial intelligence. Oh yes, be very afraid of AI if we keep on with our traits that we have. Be very afraid of it. But if every single one of us in our own lives, in our own way, makes those improvements that are needed, we all talk about it and we're all guilty of lapses, every single one of us, but it's not about how well you achieve automatically, it's about your intent. If your intent is always to try to be a better spiritual person, that carries a frequency. You may not always succeed because we're human, we're not ETs. People say we're all ETs. Sorry, I'm one of the few experiences who says, no, in this life, we've come here as a human. We may have been an ET somewhere else, we may have contact with the ET, but we've been put here for a purpose as a human. Get this straight. I get so annoyed, sorry I'm on my soapbox now, but I get so annoyed when I hear people say I'm part this and I'm part that and I'm part this and I'm part that. No, in this life, your soul chose to incarnate as a human and you're here to make changes. So forget the whiffly waffly, you're a human and there's work to do. Sorry. I got a message about 6 weeks ago, as I often do in the mediumship staff or ET staff, and just as I was waking up, it was this like someone talking in my head saying, and you are going to have to stand up, and you are going to have to speak out, you're going to have to stand up and counted, from now on you have to speak out. And I woke up, who was that? You know, oh my God, what do I have to say? But really all I have to say is what I think based on my experience. And if experiencers can't say what they think and what they've experienced on a craft and what they've been told to people who haven't been on a craft and haven't had experiences, what's the point of us doing anything? What's the point of us saying I'm an experiencer? If you're not going to walk the talk and inform people and say it like it is, what is the point? I don't stand up here for fame, glory, or anything else, and you'll hear more about that later. I stand up here because that's what I made the commitment to do, and it's really hard work. But there is hard work to be done, and it's not just me or people like me, it's every single one of us. And people in the UFO field tend to be a tad like, I consider myself independent. Hello folks, I'm here talking to you today, but I do not belong to groups and organisations. I have my own sighting organisation in New Zealand, but the Greys always said to me, remain independent, because the first thing that will be taken down by the governments and the skeptics is the big organisations. So, I think that we are on the verge of something, and we all have to act in our own way. And some people say, what do I have to do in my life? You know, I feel ready to contribute. There must be something that I have to do. Can you help me sort out what it is? And I say to them, well, you be kind. It's very basic. You be kind and you lead a good life and you be fair with people. And you put your intent out there, what you would like to do, because you've already decided before you came here what you're going to do. It's just not the right time yet. And when it is the right time, it'll drop in front of you and away you go. Don't anguish about it in the meantime. Join Greenpeace, you know, work with nature, save animals, ill-treated animals, look after the elderly, do whatever you can in your community to help out, because we have to work together. That's how we're going to survive in the future, because there's bad things coming up, you know. Let's face it, and I'm not a scaremonger, but there is. And how do we combat that? We pull together and we be the best that we can. And yes, we'll make mistakes, but it's the intent that counts. Okay, so are there any questions for the last few minutes before we have our break, and then I'll do a very, very different second half. Yes?
Just stand up and really project that voice. I'm sorry to do that to you.
In regards to the last part of the presentation, with the 5G that is going to be rolled out and everything, I mean, there's already been hundreds of doctors and scientists from around the world that have put in the bio-initiative report in 2012, how deadly that is and all the problems it's going to cause us. How is all of this sort of stuff going to kind of get out if that, because from stuff that I've looked at, I believe that a lot of the 5G stuff and all this smart technology that's coming, you know, your smart blinds and your smart house and all of that sort of stuff, is all part of the Internet of Things, where they're trying to get everybody connected.
Yep.
Via however it may be, microchip, I don't know, whatever. And then also with their plans where they, at those TED Talks where their technology, they're already saying that out of the virtual reality kind of thing where you could have the experience of anybody in the world, like say someone skydiving or whatever, you can feel what they feel without even doing it, and the line will be so blurred between what's real and what's not. That's the sort of stuff that is coming out to be forced upon us. Like, how does all this stuff, do you know what I mean? Like, how do we...
Yes, I do. And the augmented reality you're talking about, I've experienced a number of times on craft. In fact, it was so realistic, I thought I'd been transported to another planet. That's how realistic it was. You could see, hear, smell, you're in an environment. And in my book, I described the virtual reality chair, which was demonstrated to me by a Grey, and that's part of their education system and their recreation, where they can sit on this virtual reality chair, that's what I named it, and they can tap in where they want to go. They can go anywhere in the universe where they've already been and done what they're doing with us. And they could go to any environment and just immerse themselves in it, and they just look at this screen and this light comes up with stuff moving in it, and they absorb it into the eyes and they're there. So the thing is, you can develop technology and you can go up bad alleys and blind alleys, and I suspect there will be a lot of that with us, and I think there already has been. But you know, this idea of everybody being connected to this whole idea of the internet, and you know, your home is connected, your oven is connected, you know, your heater is connected, and they can tap into you and find out about you. That's very dangerous. And there's a difference between us being interconnected in that sense and interconnected through pure loving consciousness and cooperation. This cooperation is the one that we're not getting, because the technology is used to control, observe and surveil. And you remember the bit I showed you there with the young 7-year-old on the craft being taught these skills? Well, what they told me afterwards, because I asked, why is this child being taught this? Well, he's the third wave child that I write about in my book, and they said in the future the third wave will be grown up. This child is now 35. And the only way they will be able to communicate safely is through the method that they've been taught by the ETs. They will communicate with each other. It will be the only safe way. They won't be able to communicate in any other way. So, you know, I believe in people power, and I believe in protesting, and I believe in writing to newspapers and talking to your neighbour and going and speaking to groups and really informing people about what is happening, because so many people follow like sheep, and they are not educated in what is really happening and what is behind the scenes. But so much of this technology the ETs already have in an advanced form, and they're not going around harming each other or anyone else with it. And we can do the same. But what's holding us back is these bad human traits that we have of greed, power, subservience. And that's just up to us to battle it out. They can't do it all for us. We as a civilization have to create our own future. They can assist in certain ways. They can't take over. As a teacher, I know if you spoon feed a child, they don't learn anything. They only learn to mimic. They don't learn what it's really about. You've got to let people go through the throes, and we are going to go through some big throes. Any other questions? Yes. Yes, I can look into the body just as they do, and probably other people in the room too. Yes, so they do need that, because they create an archive, and it's all part of the scientific study of humankind, and the whole idea is that they're creating a database that we will be able to learn from in the future. It's not necessarily for them, and so many things on a craft are done with our future in mind, preparing humanity for other things. And also they've got that archive there so that if you come on the craft again, they can see where you were at or whatever. So there's multiple uses of this, and everything on the craft is multi-layered. Just when you think you've got it sussed, there's another layer underneath that you have to understand. Any more questions?
One more question.
Are you in an altered state of consciousness when you are on the craft?
I have been in an altered state of consciousness on many occasions when I've been taken on the craft, and other times not. And this seems to depend, for me anyway, it depends on how fast they have to get you on there, get the process done and get you back. Because, you know, often they're taking hundreds and hundreds of people on just one craft. There may be others in our atmosphere in the Northern Hemisphere or wherever doing the same. And they run to a really tight program because they have dusk and dawn to take into account. You know, they have people's personal conditions, or when a partner might be coming home from you know, work late at night and find there's no one near. So there are all kinds of things. It's just one massive logistic, complex situation.
So are you in your physical body, in your etheric body, or in your astral body when you're there?
All of those. I've been on a craft in a physical body, I've been on as a ball of light, I've been on in a spirit form, a ghost-like form, but I've also been on as a grey, where the grey identity or entity has left the body, and I write about that knowingly that happening when I was 12, but it also happened when I was 4. So, yep. That was the last one.
One more. We'll do one more.
Hello.
Hi. What about them? Any background on them, where they come from?
Yes, most experiencers will say that they don't actually know where they come from, and they have told me in groups of humans that I've been with that they no longer have a planet, they don't need a planet, because they've developed a civilization on massive craft, and the Greys in particular are here as the front species to a whole lot of species that are working together in this agenda I outlined to help us. They're the ones we interface with the most, because that's their skill, and there are other species behind that do other tasks and jobs to do with this investigating humanity and assisting us. So yeah, they just exist on these very huge craft like cities, and they can produce almost anything they want, and if there's something they need, they can go somewhere to get it.
I think we've got time for one last one just there, and there will be time after for you to take questions, but we do need to take a break.
Yes.
Yeah, look, I made a failed attempt some years ago to learn a Celtic language, and a word there intrigued me. It was one of the most useless dictionaries in this language, anyway, sort of popular dictionary. I've been warned off it. Anyway, the explanation of the foreign word was liquid electricity. Now, this book was published, I'd say, 1960s, and many copies have been sold. An electrician had his own company. He was Canadian, actually, on the North Shore, and he had many employees who'd been in that field a long time. I'm sorry I asked, because I'm even more confused with his answer, and I don't think he really knew the answer. So is this in your book about liquid electricity?
No, not liquid electricity, because as I said, I'm not a scientist. I talk about liquid light, and as I know it, and Dr. Schuld has made comment on it, but I'm going to be talking to Bill Chalker, who you'll be familiar with. He wants to talk to me about someone he also has been working with who's describing the same thing.
But would it actually be the same thing?
I don't know. I'm not a scientist, but I'm working with scientists to try and work out more about this technology I'm talking about. Thank you. In this half, I want to stretch you a little bit. With technology combined with consciousness and spirituality. And this is one of the chapters that I sent to Dr. Schuld that he actually said he understood the most. And we had spent a long time over Skype and email discussing this chapter. And when I went to stay with him last year, I think we spent 3.5 hours, which I have taped on, recorded on my dictaphone, and I have to transcribe yet, discussing consciousness and in particular some of my experiences. So let's start with that one again, the role of spirituality and consciousness in our future technology, always prompting you to bear that in mind, that that needs to be a reality. So we're going to have a look at a chapter in my book, chapter 26, A Glimpse of Cosmic Culture, which happened in 1989. I didn't really know what to call this experience and how best to describe it without it sounding like a psychedelic disco, which is what Rudy nicknamed it. But really, it epitomises all of these things put together, and it shows us our potential in the far distant future. So this experience on a craft, it involves recreation, it involves dematerialisation, it involves reforming, all through consciousness. And Michio Kaku said, a brain net may even change the course of civilization itself. Each time a new communication system has been introduced, it has irrevocably accelerated changes in society, lifting us from one era to the next. We hear a lot about, from psychology, from sociology, from the UFO field, the contact field, we hear about for many, many decades. It's not a new thing, as some researchers claim. For many decades now, we've been hearing about new humans. And those new humans are not necessarily people who've been contacted by ETs and given exotic abilities. The new human is simply us evolving, and this has been going on for a long time. It is us evolving and changing and adapting to the things that we invent, to the things that we come to terms with, to the things that we advance, etc. So we are all actually new humans in the process of evolving, and they cannot be taken out of context and said, well, these people are different, they are new humans. There's a lot of different complex groups occurring at the moment, and like I describe in my book, and star kids, etc., are only a very small part of that. Many researchers have found it to their advantage to elevate star kids, crystal children, indigo children, new humans, etc., to some elevated position of importance, when in fact, in the whole greater scheme of things, they actually are the smaller portion of what is taking place. Okay, so on this occasion, a group of 7 humans, including me, we were taken into a white room. This white room was quite confined. There was not a door that shut behind us. When you looked back out through the opening, it was like looking through a raindrop. You know how a raindrop sort of magnifies and distorts everything on the other side? It was like you walked through it and you didn't feel anything as you walked through, but once you got into the room, I would say it was quite similar to being in a light elevator without all the flashing, sparkling light. It was that same feeling of being into a slightly denser feeling environment. And when you looked back out through the door, as I said, it was like looking through a raindrop. So there was this liquid air, liquid kind of content to the environment. And the grey with us made the captivating statement, this is a quote from my book, we were about to be surrounded by pure thought, and asked us to move towards the centre of the room. And before our eyes, the walls of the room, or the surroundings of the room, and this is where the technology mixes with augmented reality, mixes with consciousness, because the walls seemed to recede until they were no longer visible. The floor and the ceiling were no longer visible. So it's going from this sort of thing to that sort of thing. And out of this whiteness came a number of figures. Now, I've only got 3 there, but there were more than that, and there was also a mantis figure and a couple of other mixed species. They weren't just all the greys. I've just put that together as a composite to give you some idea. So you go from being within the confines of a room to being within a vast space. And and not being able to see the actual boundary or the confines of the room itself. And we were told by the Grey that we were to watch, and they were going to perform something for us. So they were going to release something for us to observe, and then we would be invited to join in. They were very accommodating and very, if I was to put it into English, I'd say they were very kind and they were very gentle, they were very subtle. There was no pressure, there was no feeling of you might fail this. It was just like, well, here we are, and we're going to show you our form of recreation, but at the same time, we want you to understand some of the physics and the scientific concepts behind it of what we are able to do. And we were told one day you will do this. So slowly the form of the entities began to take on an indistinct smudgy appearance, and their outlines began to waver and shimmer. And slowly we began to see, they said that they would, with their mind and consciousness, they would colour the atoms, if you like to put it that way, that coming off them as they disintegrated, so that we could see this as a coloured mist and we could understand what was really happening in front of us. So the exterior form, like you can see my shoulder, you can see my head, began to melt away. And in fact, I have seen children do this on a craft where they just disintegrated. These very young children on a craft being trained, and they're not star kids, they're the third wave that I write about in my book. They're not the star kids. And they begin to disintegrate, and I've seen children do it where they just do it for fun, as he said, recreation. And their whole physical form just begins to drift off into the air like this. And then when they want to, they come back and they reform. And but their consciousness is still there. So although these entities were beginning to disintegrate in front of us, we could still hear them conversing with us, talking to us, etc. So consciousness surpasses all else. Vibrant colours began to emanate from the figures, at first like little tongues of flame, but quickly engulfing their entire bodies with kaleidoscopes of blazing intensity. And what they did was, they said that the central grey who was communicating with us, I described, had this thought voice that was coming to each of us. And he was saying, okay, and once they'd disintegrated completely, these colours just went up and they just swirled, and they kept them separate, so the colours were swirling around like this. It was very beautiful. And at that point, he said, we're going to introduce the big brain now. We're going to introduce this like you're in a pure thought, in a great big mind. And so then they began to emanate the feelings from them that they associated with this process, which was their form of one of their forms of recreation. And at that point, each of us became so overwhelmed with the emotion of it, that there were tears running down our faces. It was like you just wanted to collapse down onto the floor, even though you couldn't see the floor anymore, because we talk about being happy, and we use the word joy sometimes. You see it in a lot of biblical things, the word joy, a lot of writings and ancient scriptures, the word joy. But I wonder how many of us have actually experienced pure joy. I haven't experienced pure joy in my life. I've been happy, and I've been very happy, but I can't say that I've ever had extreme joy. So that would be the word that I would associate with this process that they were demonstrating to us, was extreme joy, to the extent that it surpassed all else, and it was so intense, it went right through your whole entire being, your consciousness, your physical body, everything, this extreme joy. And so they swirled these colours up into the air, and then the body's completely disintegrated, and then the thought voice said, give us something to form into. So one person said, a pencil, and so they all formed a pencil. And then the rest of the colours were still swirling. Okay, a flower appeared, and someone said a bee appeared. So they're using this matter, or whatever it is. Remember, I'm not a scientist, I'm only describing what I saw and felt. So they formed these objects in the air, showing us that the physical body can reform, but the mind, if you want to put it that way, the consciousness is still there separate. So they began what I described as an energetic dance of the mind, mentally and spiritually joining with each other. The colours swirling and twisting, becoming effervescent, swirling and exploding. We were surrounded by pure thought, intelligent light, because remember, there was some kind of technology behind this. Remember, when I walked into the room, there was an enhanced light. There was an enhanced environment that had to be done with a combination of consciousness and technology. These are the things we don't understand in our quest towards AI. We don't understand how these things yet can be combined for a good purpose. And we were told that we were having a glimpse of our own future and that humans will be able to do this. Well, I've already seen children on a craft doing it. But, you know, you're not doing it, I'm not doing it here, this is the wrong environment, we're not ready. And when I was researching this particular experience, my book had just come out, I was contacted by a professor in the States called Carlos. He likes to be known as Carlos. And those of you who have read the late Dr. John Mack's book, Abduction, may recall that one of the chapters there is about a man called Carlos, and this is this gentleman. He was very much younger then, of course, when John Mack wrote that book. And Carlos said to me he had just read my book and he could not believe, even though he's quite, a couple of decades older than me, he could not believe how much that I talked about is what he had experienced and what is actually documented by Dr. Mack. Well, I hadn't read that book for years, so I went and got it out of the depths of my cupboard and started underlining things that he was saying, and the similarity was profound. So we've talked to each other over a period of years now, and he described how this room changed, how this vast white space appeared, and he said the floor resembled a dance floor composed of dense matter. It was not solid, but he could stand on it. And there was the feeling that he was standing on open space. That's how he described it. And I described it in my book as a vast room and expanded space. A feeling as if I was floating, as if suspended in mid-air, although I could feel the soft floor. So here we have these very similar descriptions of this technology-enhanced vast space in which you feel as if you're floating, but at the same time you're aware there's something under you, but the parameters of the room have disappeared, and you've now taken your consciousness with the assistance of technology and their consciousness into some other space. And Dr. Schild described this experience as very close in terms of the extreme joy and the ecstatic state that the humans ended up in as being the closest thing as a sexual relationship with these entities through consciousness in a recreational fashion. I sort of felt a tad embarrassed when he said that, but he could well be right. That is his thoughts on the matter. Okay, so when we had finished that experience, halfway through they said to us, okay, we are inviting you, we're inviting you to let yourselves go. Let yourselves go and see if you can join us. Just let yourself go. So why they selected out those 7 humans plus me, the 8 of us, I don't know. Perhaps we had demonstrated something in our interactions with them that they thought we might be able to do it. But we couldn't. We were kind of looking at each other and we could not quite get to that stage where we just let everything go and drifted out like that. But as I said, I have seen young children do that, just like it's like, kicking a ball around. But Carlos did do that, and he describes how he disintegrated into a shower of light. And he describes the extreme ecstasy and the extreme joy that, that was, projected from this activity. So, I'm going to make this half a bit shorter so that then I can just talk to you off camera and then we can have some questions. So the big question mark is, and I've talked a little bit about this already, is why are they doing this? Why are they doing this with us? Well, we all know that we're a big danger out there. We've developed nuclear technology. We've developed, nuclear warfare. We're planning to go out into space, and Mr. Trump says we're already out there, as well as a lot of whistleblowers. How much of that is true, I don't know. But our intention certainly seems to be, through NASA and other groups, to be out there. So we go back to this status that we are in at present of spiritual stagnancy. And we look at the fact that the UFO community and those who are aware of these related topics is minuscule on this planet. And the UFO community worldwide can be quite arrogant in that respect, and I hear a lot of people say, disclosure has to happen, it has to happen soon, or why hasn't it happened? It has to happen. Why does it have to happen? And everywhere you go, you hear different perspectives on disclosure. In my travels in the States, and I'll be going there again later this year into Finland, I'm discovering that wherever I go, the concept of disclosure is very different. Although their manifesto might read something similar, it's very different. In the States, it's very much, they want political stuff released. They want military stuff released. They want medical stuff released. And then somewhere in the mix, there's the UFO stuff as well. You go overseas, and in Europe, for example, there are exopolitics groups, and I've spoken at one in Denmark, but there's less emphasis. They've got their files out, same as New Zealand has, and they've seen a bit of skullduggery going on with the files coming out, as I did when I was lobbying the Chief of Defence in New Zealand, saw all the little games that were going on, and it's a whole other story. But really, what is disclosure? And does it matter if we hear all of these things? Because disclosure is actually us. Disclosure is every time someone has a UFO sighting. Disclosure is every time an experiencer speaks about their experiences. Disclosure is every time a person becomes interested in a subject and searches it on Google. And disclosure need not be hearing about what pieces of craft they've put away somewhere, because that's not actually an integral part of our spiritual development and where we're going. If those groups want to maintain that little threshold of power and they want to maintain their secrecy, well, that's up to them, but the rest of us don't have to buy into that. For goodness sake, let's think for ourselves. We don't have to buy into that. We just carry on doing what we're doing. Because, the ETs have told me and the group of humans I'm in that, and I write it in my book, that over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have en masse people in what I call the second wave, which I belong to, of souls who've come in to help this planet. Read it in my book. That second wave is going to come out en masse, and they're going to be grandparents, they're going to be great-grandparents, they're going to be people who've retired from professional positions or community jobs or whatever. They're going to have families and are standing in the community. And when those people start remembering their experiences, and they're people that people look up to in communities or whatever, it's going to be shocking. It's going to be a shock for many of their families. It's going to be a shock for people who worked with them, etc. But it is going to happen because that driving force of commitment, which I have felt since I was a very small child, is going to manifest in other people as well. And the experiencers sitting down the back there know exactly what I mean by that commitment. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So when people start saying, well, actually, you know, I saw something on telly the other night about ancient aliens or whatever, and actually I think it's time I tell you what I experienced back in 1956. And the family listens and goes, oh, God, you never told us that. And instantly you've got an entire family that has to either align with or come to terms with what this person is saying. We're going to have more and more of this, and that leads me on to the next point, because I'm going to get controversial again. The next point is, how are we going to deal with this? How are groups like this going to deal with this? Because it's going to be a tidal wave of people coming forward. There are a lot of people making a lot of wild claims now. Some of them are true and some of them are not true, and I don't care whether you like me saying that and think I'm judgmental or not, because I've been around a long time and I've spoken at a lot of conferences, and I've seen a lot of people who are in there for the showmanship and the circus, and I've seen the ones who are quietly there with their experience. And you always look for the quiet ones. So, the Greys have said that there'll be a big sorting and sifting sooner or later. And when an announcement comes or something happens that makes us think, yes, they are out there, it is real, and it need not be a big disclosure from a government. It may be something the ETs have arranged, because let's face it, they are actually in control of this, not us. If they want to align with us and get to know us and think we are a danger and they want to help us, they're in control of the process. And we don't need these other fluffy things that have been happening in the UFO field for a very long time. We need to get our feet on the ground. We need to be more practical. And groups need to prepare for this avalanche of people coming forward. Lost my train of thought. So that leads me on to integrity in the field, which is very dear to my heart. It has been for a long time. I've written articles about it. No one's ever written to me and said that was a good article, but I hope someone read it. Integrity in the field. So what do we do with all these people coming forward now or coming forward in the future? We actually need to move to the point where we have properly qualified and informed people to deal with them. Because worldwide there are a lot of so-called researchers and hypnotherapists who actually have no qualifications but sell themselves as having qualifications. Sell themselves as being professionals in this or that. And on their websites they put where they have worked. Hello. That's not the question you should be asking. You should be asking, but what is your qualification? Because I work with a small group of people worldwide who are experiencers, and some of them are public speakers, and we are very disturbed, actually, by some of the work that's being done out there by hypnotherapists, in inverted commas, because they're priming the clients. They're giving them information beforehand. They're saying, oh, I've spoken to people before and they report this and they report that, and I expect that I might hear this from you, and then they do the regression. That's exactly what they get, and everyone comes out a star kid or having had experiences or whatever. And those people are now coming to people like me saying, I no longer trust this. Did this really happen to me? I'm absolutely gutted, you know. I don't know where I fit in this anymore. And look, I've learnt a bit more about regression, and I've been led here, I've been primed here, or whatever. So what groups like this need to do is have properly qualified people with the piece of paper and who have read widely and informed themselves on the topic, but who practice it carefully. So you've got people like Brian Dickerson, your former president, trained by New South Wales Police in forensic hypnotherapy. You need people with pieces of paper, not people who say, I worked here and I worked there and I'm a professional. You ask, where is the piece of paper, and show me. And don't let it be a weekend course they did somewhere. Because what we're discovering and what I'm discovering through looking at consciousness and telepathy and things that are done with the mind and the consciousness on craft is that, hello, humans have this unethical side to our nature that they don't seem to have when they work with each other's minds. And it is very dangerous what can be put into a person's mind or what they can be convinced of. And then that becomes gospel, and it's a very, very sad and serious thing that can then become their life. You are dealing with a person's life. So we need to prepare for this. Groups need to know where they're going in the future, what might occur. Be ready for it. Prepare yourself. Have, as I do in New Zealand with UFocus NZ, which is a sighting research network investigation, I have spent years getting on side people who will work with us in the background. So I can call on air traffic controllers, I can call on pilots for aviation consultancy, I can call on doctors, I can call on a neuroscientist, I can call on a psychiatrist. There's a whole raft of people that we can call on that's taken years to develop, because trying to deal with it yourself and think you know it all is the wrong thing to do, and there's a lot of researchers and hypnotherapists doing that. And the Greys also said that in the future there would be cults and cult followings, and some of those would be researchers, some of those would be people in the field, and they'll lead you up blind alleys. And one of the whistleblowers from, not all, I'm not saying all, I'm only generalising, there's some out there doing a lot of damage, but there are equally some very good people with integrity that I know and work with. But it's a matter of knowing the wheat from the chaff, because this is our future. This subject is far more important than probably any of us realise. This is our future. And we have to get it right starting now. And that means doing the right things and attracting the right people and feeling that we can delegate or we can consult with a person of greater knowledge than ourselves. And we have to be able to admit if we don't know something, we don't fudge it and make it up. We consult. Because this is people's lives. And on one event on craft, I was shown a group of humans who were there's a futuristic image they put up on screen, as they do often, and these were people who had made all kinds of claims about ET stuff, and eventually they were revealed when what the Greys called the big time of investigation happens. And these people were sorely regretting having made the ridiculous claims they made. So we're getting to a time, as I said, in the States, they're very much into, well, show me some evidence. Don't just tell the story. Where are you going with the story? What research are you doing into your own experiences? And I think I've always approached my contact experiences in the same vein as investigative vein that I do with a sighting. Go through the protocols, go through the list, dig deeper. So, why are they doing this? Because at a soul level, that's me, the pinky purple light, that's my son, the blue one. At a soul level, we agreed to do this. Now, there are people who say, well, you didn't, or I didn't, or whatever. It is my experience, and everyone has a different opinion on that. I can only say what I experienced, that I did agree to do this. The alternative life I was offered was an intelligent sponge on a newly forming planet, and I decided I'd take this one. Why are they doing it? Because they are taking mother and baby on board craft. The mothers are part of the programs, a second or third waiver, and they're taking the babies on with mum. As happened to me, this is actually drawings from one of the experiences I talk about in my spiritual speech. and they lay them out on a table, and you've got the same very, very early situation of learning to communicate as I described in the playrooms, but this is with babies. And they lie them on these warm tables with soft edges, whole lot of them. There was a whole room of 7 large tables with babies all over it, mums and greys wandering around, looking at them all, and they watched the kids communicating. They watched them recognising, looking at each other, and that early communication. So it's like this whole racism thing of different races, looking at and accepting each other from a very early age and learning to cooperate. And on that occasion, one of the greys bent over my son and was clearly telling me he was picking up early communication from him, and I was miffed because I wasn't. And I felt I should have. But you see, they're so much more advanced in what they can access. And when I was 8 and I was introduced to the soul of my son, there's that early recognition, early cooperation again. They had him on the craft, enhancing and training him, and I used to play with him when I went on board because he wasn't going to incarnate till I was 28. And I had all those years of forming an extremely close bond. And that's the one I showed you earlier on where the merging process took place. And they slowed my entire metabolism down so that that soul could enter the body without sending my body into shock, because they said he had been enhanced. And I'm writing more about that in my next book. I'm not saying that to sell my next book because I've probably given away more books than I've ever sold. But really it is something that is much more advanced, and I have to think carefully about how I'm presenting it. So we're living in a time of global chaos. We see that every day. And in fact, in every country you go to, and you're sitting there in the hotel waiting, do your speech the next day or whatever, and you turn on the telly in the motel or hotel room, and there's some terrible things happening in that country that you would never hear about on the news in New Zealand. So there's stuff happening every day, and we are so sheltered from a lot of it that it's astonishing. It's astonishing we even survive as a civilization, what we do to ourselves and to each other. And talking to some of the committee in the break about what's happening to the environment. Well, we're trying to cover so many bases at once. We've got the environment, we've got spiritual development, we've got the air we breathe, we've got the soil, we've got all of these things, we've got technology, we've got things we need to clean up, we've got health problems, we've got homeless people, we've got, immigrants moving en masse through countries. What on earth are we doing? No wonder they're here. So, in 1980, 87 and 89, there were 3 crucial meetings I write about in my book, one at an undersea base in 1980, one in 87 on a large craft, and one underground. And this is another speech that Robert and I work together on these underground, undersea bases that we can talk about. And we were shown disclosure of a different kind. And one of the committee members said to me during the break, what about the timeline? Well, the Greys will reach, and all the ETs will reach into your mind sometime. They'll do a quick scan, find a phrase that you're familiar with, that you'll understand, they pull it out, and then they spit it back at you in a sentence or in a concept, and they explain something to you using your terminology that you're familiar with. And so we were told that about disclosure, and we were told it was like a rubber band. This whole concept we have in our heads of disclosure, or the final revelation that they're here to the wider public. And that is, some days it depends on our spirituality and our consciousness and how far we're moving in all of these things, spaces we've got to cover. And so some days the rubber band's right out here and we're doing really well. And then, hello, something terrible happens somewhere that we've created and we're back here. And the next week it might be up here. The next week it's way out here. The tension's on. We're getting there, and ping, it's back here again. And that was their way of describing it. And until we can stabilise that and harmonise that and start moving it like this, we're in trouble. So he stated that in the future there will be wild speculation, enthrallment, blame, fear, and a multitude of theories pertaining to the idea of contact with extraterrestrials. And we see that all the time. The cults, the strange cults that have happened in the States where people have all committed suicide because, you know, the ascension didn't happen last week and they don't know what to do anymore, so let's get out of here. There's all sorts of things happening. There's cult followings with researchers, cult followings with all sorts of things. Religion, you name it, we are cult followers. And we've got to the point where we look at Mr. Google and Mr. Google says, this is the trend at the moment, folks. So everyone starts using the same jargon, the same terminology. They're studying, they can go to 5D, they're quantum this, they're quantum that. Do we really understand quantum? I've been talking about quantum for years with Rudy and I still don't understand it, and I've experienced it. So let's get our feet on the ground. Let's get our heads shrunk down a little bit to normal size, and let's start critically thinking about everything we're drinking in and treating as reality. Let's start thinking, because the moment we start thinking, we put out the power of intent. Change happens. He also said widespread chaos will occur. There'll be a dead stage on the planet, not where everything dies, but it will just be so down and despondent and miserable. The human psyche will experience global despondency and people will be at a loss to know where to go, even physically or geographically, or where to turn for assistance and guidance. That's happening now. It's been happening for a number of years. It was happening in 2015 when I spoke in Europe and Scandinavia, and I was going down through Italy when the refugees were coming up. It was a terrible situation for both sides. But, you know, as I said, when you're sitting in a hotel room somewhere in some country and you're looking at the news, you discover that's happening all over the place. But in New Zealand, we only heard about refugees going up through Europe. But there's vast rafts of people moving all around the world in every continent. Nowhere to go. No one wants them. Shiploads of people. How did we get to this situation? And I say in my book that from listening to the ETs talk and discuss things with us, and they do discuss, they do not just tell you, they discuss. I've been in situations where the discussion has got so profound and so fast telepathically that it became the hive mind. And there was this hum in the room and there was no more questions and no more answers because everyone knew everything they needed to know at that point. And then it stopped. So I understand that there are trained people who are integrated, trained by the ETs, integrated right across societies worldwide. There are societal framework upon which contact can eventually rest. That was 1989. And one of the committee members said, well, is this going to happen? I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. And a lot of the time I don't think it's going to happen in mine. But it is my job and many other people's job to speak about this, to familiarise people with what is happening and get people to think for themselves. I don't expect you all sitting there to believe everything I say because every one of you has got different experiences to base your thoughts on. But I do expect you to question me politely, and I will attempt to answer politely, and if I don't know, I am not afraid to say I do not know. I'm not going to make something up. So there are humans trained by the ETs who are in society, ready to step into action should this revelation take place. And there's this contingency plan of generation after generation being prepared, so that if it doesn't happen here, these ones are ready. And I might die off, and it might be my son who helps to see it in with his age group. Because it depends on where we are and what we're doing and how fast we're doing it. Communicators, that's the word I've coined for people who communicate with ETs, because in the past we've had the early contactees, the abductees, the experiencers, and then there's a bit of a misnomer because some people are now calling themselves contactees again, but that term is already taken. Please think of another appropriate one. So communicators who have had contact are being activated worldwide, and as I said, when more of them start communicating their experiences and understanding of extraterrestrial contact themselves through a variety of means, it will facilitate an unlocking process in people who as yet have little or no conscious memory of why they incarnated in this life. And don't worry, because as the wheel turns and the cog turns, if it's your turn to contribute, it'll happen. Be nice, be kind in the meantime. How the communicators present their knowledge and experiences to the public will be crucial. This ongoing process of triggering human consciousness is part of our expansion of awareness, a microcosmic reflection of our expanding universe. And that sentence in blue, how the communicators present their knowledge and experiences to the public, will be crucial. Because, as I said before, the amount of people in the UFO field worldwide is minuscule. The rest of the world doesn't care. Some of them are vaguely interested. They might watch Ancient Aliens. They might see an alien in an advert and think that looks cute. But the vast majority of them don't think about it because they're leading hard, harsh lives. Or they're leading fast lives and they're having far too much fun and spending far too much money to care. But at some stage, there's going to be something happen. I don't know what, but that's what ETs say. Wait till something happens. And then you'll all wake up. And then what do we do? What do groups like this do? And are we prepared? So I talk to a lot of experiencer groups worldwide on Skype in Canada and Denmark and all over the place, UK. And we talk about how experiencers can prepare. And in the experiencer sessions I took at the Congress in Phoenix, I got them talking about this because year after year they talk about their experiences. And I said, but hang on a minute, can we get past that? We were doing that in 1999 when I was at the Congress speaking. This is 2018. If people need to talk about their experiences because they're a more recent thing that's happened in their life, put them with a professional to quietly discuss it, or other experiencers quietly, privately. Otherwise their material will be ripped off by someone, as some of my material has been ripped off over the years, and will appear somewhere else with someone else's name on it. Talk to them privately because they have to be nurtured. They don't want to be pushed out into the public arena and told, oh, I want to put you up on stage and get you to talk during my speech by some researcher or whatever. They need to be nurtured along, or they're going to go down a wrong track, be very unhappy, as many people have been. We need to look after these people who are going to be coming out. And the way experiencers behave is very important. Okay, we're all human. We all have different personality traits. Some of us are offhand. Some of us are not. We're all different. But please, experiencers getting up, do your homework. Present yourself well. Do your homework. Investigate your experiences well. Research. Don't be afraid to say you don't know. Be truthful. Don't embellish it. There was a head of psychology at a large district health board in New Zealand who flew to the States to hear me speak because he is interested in assisting people with these problems. If you present yourself well and do your homework, you will attract scientists and the public will find it credible. And don't for 1 minute think, as some researchers are putting out there, that sightings are done and dusted and they're not important. I get very irate when I hear that. I'm really on my soapbox today. Because this is how the public will come into the subject. Some of them may come in through the contact arena because they think it's quite curious and interesting, but the vast majority will find it safer to come through the door of the sightings. And unless we maintain those archives and investigate those sightings well and document them, we won't have anything credible to put in front of them. UFOCS NZ now has over 10,000 sightings, well documented and archived. That is a treasure trove. And I can get up and speak for hours about New Zealand sightings, and many of those became contact experiences. So they're not done and dusted.